Good morning. Please, my friends with whom we will discuss populism, come and join me on the scene. Sorry for coming late. I wanted to be as quick as possible, so I took a shortcut. And as you can imagine, it ended all in total mess. I take it as a precaution. I hope we will avoid all intellectual shortcuts in our debate on populism and try and find a new and refreshing perspective. My name is Ostolski. I have the honor of being the host of this morning's show, and our guests with whom we are going to discuss the issues of populism and security are starting from the left, or to the right from your perspective is Sergey Lagodinsky from Germany, the director of Heinrich Böll Stiftung's Office of Europe and North America, also lawyer and journalist, author of a book about anti-Semitism in new contexts. In the middle, Rui Tavares from Portugal, historian, also writer, who served as a member of European Parliament in the previous term, and now is one of the founders of a new Green Party in Portugal. He's also a member of DiEM25 movement. Closest to me is Kannitha LEANG, a lawyer and political scientist, advisor to a French Green senator. So we have very diverse perspectives and people with very different backgrounds, but all progressive. So I hope for a fruitful and diverse discussion about our topic. And just to introduce it, populism is, of course, a hotly contested concept. So there are many debates about the definition itself. And very often this discussion about words, albeit necessary, may shadow the real problems, the real challenges that we face. So I hope we are not going to spend too much time on definition and just try to talk as precisely as we can. It is, of course, difficult to meet on a single concept of populism. For some people, it is a negative concept, like a universal slur. For others, it's a naturally positive concept, especially in Latin America or even in the North America. It's quite often used as a positive label. For some, it's just a description. So without taking any assumptions and leaving to our debaters the decision of how to understand populism, it's necessary to point to this difficulty. And the usual approach to populism, especially in Europe, is to talk about it with a negative approach and at least with some suspicion. Very often it is said that populists mobilize people to fight against some perceived or imagined or fabricated dangers. And even though we know we live in a world full of dangers, they are not necessarily those to which the populists point. Actually, we published recently a new issue of Green European Journal, Fear and Trembling, which is devoted to many dangers and insecurities of the present world and how political actors and especially Green movement try to deal with them. And there is an article also by Rui Tavares in this issue, so I recommend you if you want to read more about insecurities. And now going to our already to our debate, I'd like to I'm tempted to reverse the usual assumption at the beginning, and instead of asking the usual questions of how to combat populism or why populism is dangerous, I'd like to ask Sergey, what actually can we learn from the populists? Sergey, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. What we can learn from populists is an interesting question. I think what we can learn from populists is one thing: you should take voters and take people and their concerns seriously. This is pretty much all that I think we can learn from populists. We should be grateful to populists. This is a different thing, for an opportunity to understand what we are. And I think this is something that we all have seen during the past couple of years, where populists challenged us in our presumptions, in our understanding of our society, and in our maybe shortcomings in trying to grasp the situation in which our societies are and what people long for. And at least in Western European countries, like in Germany, this was quite a sobering experience for all political and intellectual elites to start thinking about how people think in places where they're not, and you have it the same in the United States, etc. But it was also a sobering experience in terms of what are the... Because we tend to want to give answers, but maybe we should pause there and start looking for the right questions, and being able to just pose questions that are moving people, that people are interested in, not being afraid of posing those questions, and maybe sometimes even say, well, we don't have answers, and these answers we have to arrive together.
Can you give an example of a question that we should not be afraid to ask?
Well, one of the questions that I think we should be asking is the question of diversity in our society, and the future of diversity in our society, whether our societies want more diversity. And I actually, I can explain what I mean by that later when we will be talking about kind of the agenda in the future. I think we all agree that we are proud of the diversity that we have in our societies, but we are not our voters. Yeah, I don't mean green voters. I mean voters in our countries, and we cannot assume that our ease about the colorful future that we all want to have is shared by everyone. So before we start negotiating with our people, with our societies, about what kind of colorful future we want to be, that people feel included in this future and not excluded from this future, before we start doing that, knowing that we might arrive in a point we don't even know where, we have to be able to ask this question. Why is diversity per se, as a future concept, is an end in itself? Is it an end in itself? We are afraid of this question. Because for us, it's, it's something we believe in. It's an assumption, full stop. But the society is not there yet. And before we, remain with our 5% and being irrelevant, we should start a conversation, and every conversation starts with a question.
Okay, I would press you a little bit more on one point. You said that we need to start treating voters seriously. The usual assumption is that after 1989 there was a triumph of liberal democracy, and we have democracies everywhere. And of course, in democracies, voters are the ruler. So it may be assumed that if we live in democracy, the voters are already treated seriously enough, isn't it?
I didn't understand the last question because the acoustic is... It might be...
Voters are treated seriously in democracy, if we live in a democracy.
Well, I don't quite understand where you're going with that, but first of all, we live in liberal democracies. And liberal democracies, I don't think I have to recapitulate on that, are not a majoritarian rule without borders. And I think this is something, by the way, we have to start explaining and start discussing with voters, because there are many misconceptions. 1989 was not just about wir sind das Volk. It was also about wir sind ein Volk. Speaking German now. We are a people who want to live in a society where minorities are protected, where constitution is there, where our majoritarian power is limited and constrained by our constitutions. And this is something we have to explain to the people. So your starting assumption that democracy is about just majorities or just voters, it's not right. And I think we, the Green Movement, have to get serious about this, because we have contributed to this populist surge on the right by always talking about these questions, always saying, it's like in Berlin and in Germany, there was this question of participation, and it was understood as a participation of direct democracy. No, direct democracy is dangerous. We live in a representational democracy, and we have to explain, and we have to find a green, progressive answer, an explanation of why it makes sense to listen to people, to take them with you, to explain to them, but also to get them to get them buy into the narrative of limitations that our democracy imposes also on them and their expectations. And without that, there will be no progressive future. There will be majoritarian democratic future, maybe. But it will be maybe a future that we're having here where, the autocrats are going to just captivate this idea and do whatever they want.
Actually, it's living in Poland, it's quite an exciting experience to live in,
I'm sure,
in times when history is at last back. There are many questions which your answers bring, and I hope you are already inventing them for our wider discussion in which we shall start, I hope, in half an hour. But now let's turn to France. It is assumed after the widespread relief of Emmanuel Macron's victory, it is assumed that it was a triumph of classical, liberal, democratic, or even technocratic politics over populism. But there are also some differing interpretations which contest this view, saying that Macron is not the ultimate anti-populist as much as he is a new sort of liberal or central populist. And if you look at his politics, like a party with no clear platform, but a clear leader, demands from left and right combined together without actually much coherence, it's not something that you would usually associate with the concept of technocratic politics. So, Kannitha, is Macron an inventor of new sort of populism? And to follow up on the question I posed to Sergey, can we learn anything from populists in France?
Thank you, Adam. Yes, so let me surely give you a big perspective about the different lessons we could learn from this different election. So, as you all know, a few months ago, French citizens had 2 appointments with the polls, so as to elect their president and also the member of the National Assembly. And so first one that you can raise is that even though populism and Marine Le Pen failed to win the presidency, it has played a major role during the elections. Traditionally, sovereignty, the preferred topic of the far-right candidate, has inspired many candidates, such as François Fillon, the frontrunner of the Republicans, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of the far-left party, to the point that in the first round, more than half of the vote went to candidates in favor of isolationism. And so the answer to the question, what fueled populism in France, are rather common to the other countries. First of all, a large part of them feels ignored or even abandoned by political leaders. They also feel powerless in front of the swift change that occurs since, for instance, the explosion of internet and the collapse of physical as well as digital borders that followed. And they also feel powerless in front of the globalization, which reinforce social inequities. And they also fear the terrorist threat. But this election have also highlighted the limits of the populist forces. Because this last year, Marine Le Pen has worked hard on the policy of de-demonization of the party, so as not to be anymore associated to homophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, or even Holocaust denial. However, she has, during this election, reached a glass ceiling in this policy, and in appearing statesman-like during the debate between the two rounds of the runoff and against Emmanuel Macron. And her leadership is now shaken because many view her as totally inept to lead the fight against the EU, as she couldn't clarify her position vis-à-vis the departure from the Eurozone. And yeah, even now the party is seeking to ease the tight situation. Second point that we can learn from it is that this election has led to a total reorganization of the French political landscape. And which now see an opposition between partisan and opponent to Europe instead of simply right against left. That's what you said. And yeah, so in France, actually, according to the last Eurobarometer survey, we learned that only 4% of the French people trust political parties, and this is the lowest rate in the EU. And the populists have used and fed this distrust towards traditional parties to further their causes. And actually, so did Macron too, by advocating a renewal of the political class. And the verdict is clear, since traditional parties were absent in the second round of the presidential elections. And with the results of the legislatives, the French political class has been almost completely renewed, whereas the Socialist Party and the Republicans, which dominated the political scene from 1981, and so as Europe Ecology, the Greens, also collapsed. And this landslide victory of this pro-EU and centrist movement En Marche has also shattered any other political alternative. And thus we can say that Macron's responsibility toward the fights against populism is now even more higher, because the path for a rise of new left-wing and right-wing parties will be long and filled with all sorts of obstacles, since Macron is trying to spread his movement over both sides, especially over the right-wing. So yes, in a way we can say that Macron has been capable to create a new kind of centrist populism against the traditional political parties, but it is different from the populism carried out by the extremists. Security and defense are key topics of Macron's new movement, as it is for Le Pen. However, they totally diverge on the solution they advocate. Indeed, Macron supports the project of an EU who protects its citizens and which is capable to bring a concrete answer to their fears, not on the national level. And Macron is also different from Le Pen. He positioned himself in opposition to her, and he has called for more ambitious European integration based on a liberal approach, and also for a European defense in close partnership with Germany. So yes, he has the opportunity to bring a new impulse to the EU project so as to draw new paths of solidarity and cooperation against the crisis that Europe is facing right now. And last point, last but not least, even though the populist wave have been stopped this time, the threat has not been totally driven out, and every action from En Marche will be scrutinized by the French citizens. It would be actually also misleading to say that Macron mostly won thanks to only to his vision of a liberal Europe. He also won because a part of his constituency fears the Front National and they need renewal at all costs. And never since 1969, the abstention for a second round has been this high, namely more than 25% of the vote cast. And moreover, there were also 6% of blank ballot that can be interpreted as a boycott refusing to support Le Pen, neither Macron. So all of this weaken also his score. And well, to conclude, I would say that in the next years, the big challenges will probably be for him, so against populism, to bring enough protection to the French person who are in need and feel abandoned by the political leaders, and also to clarify his strategy to fight against poverty and social inequities. So yeah, let's see what's coming next.
I will press you a little bit more on one issue. Arguably, what Macron achieved was also the loss of differentiation in the political spectrum, like the collapse of traditional parties and also combining people of different convictions under one roof. Do you believe it is a sustainable solution for the longer term, or will it be necessary to rebuild democratic spectrum of competing political parties against this Macron's overtake?
Well, I think it's maybe too early to analyze the situation, but what is clear is that the population needs a new wave to conduct policy and to be understood by politicians. They also ask for more democratic, interactive debate and more possibilities to have some impact on it. And I think that, well, it could be, that Macron could actually bring some new ways to deal with this wish. And there are some different projects that we have also experienced in France. Like, for instance, you have this association, Parliament and Citizen, which enable citizens to take part in the discussion of a draft of law and to bring their opinion and to give some amendments. And this is how citizens can take part to policy, and that's also something that I know Macron wants to work on. So this could be a good challenge to how we practice democracy, and yeah.
Thank you. Building on what Kannitha said about the vision of Europe, which protects her citizens, it is a very seductive vision, and it also needs to be related to the reality. Rui, you were a member of European Parliament, and as a member of European Parliament, you wrote a report on the rule of law in Hungary. So that was one case of Europe trying to protect its citizens from the populist or authoritarian danger. But you also come from the south of Europe, and in countries like Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece especially, it may be seen that Europe very often serves not as a force, an agent who protects her citizens, but rather as a center imposing austerity and very often also undermining democracy instead of protecting democracy. And you also come from a country, Portugal, where there is no populist force, at least no populist force visible from abroad, and there is, oddly enough, a successful, the most successful social democratic government in Europe. Perhaps it is a coincidence, and perhaps it is not. I leave it as a question, but the question to you also as a member of Democracy in Europe movement, of Yanis Varoufakis, is also to build on what Sergey said about treating voters seriously at last, as the main lesson we can take from populists. What would it mean from your perspective as a former MEP, as a Portuguese politician, but also as a both DiEM25 and Green Party member?
Thank you. So let's take it part by part, starting with Hungary. What happened in Hungary was that Viktor Orban was breaking the promise that he himself and other Hungarian politicians had made to their people during the transition. And the promise, the very explicit promise, was let's be European and democratic at the same time, because being part of the European Union or part of the European project is the way to achieve sustainability to our democracy. Many of the countries in Eastern Europe, they have had a checkered, intermittent history of sovereignty. And countries that have been repeatedly invaded, annexed, partitioned between empires, and the accession to the European project was a way to both achieve sovereignty, but an interdependent sovereignty that would mean that if, again, Hungary or Poland or any other European country backtracks into authoritarianism, they will not be abandoned. So the big complaints, and I know because I come from a country where we say the same in a different way, which is after World War II, Eastern Europe was left to its own devices, or the devices of the Soviet Union at the time, but also Spain and Portugal were also abandoned in the democratization wave that took place after World War II. So we were left with post-fascist, very conservative governments in the guise of Franco's Spain and Salazar's Portugal. So our complaint for decades was, Europe has abandoned us. When we acceded the Union in '86, the promise that was done, the promise that was done that was made to the Portuguese and the Spaniards was the same promise that was made to the Poles, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Hungarians, and so forth. We just came from the other side of the mirror, from the other side of the political spectrum, but the promise was the same. This European promise was about popular sovereignty or democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights for everybody, majority and minority alike, and shared prosperity. These are elements of an European promise that, if you think about it, had been around or had been contended about since at least 1 century old, because all these elements were already in the debates, in the European discussions before World War I. When, you know, Jean Jaurès, the French socialist, was telling workers to not make war, to just go on a general strike, because that war would only interest the bankers and the emperors, and that you know, workers in Europe should unite in order to get democracy and socialism at the same time. So this is 100 years old. It was already there. What we have maybe that we could add to that European promise, that was sometimes implicit, but sometimes quite explicit, is that from the 70s and 80s on, we also have added the green element to that. So on top of democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights, and shared prosperity, we also have responsibility towards the planet, or a high degree of environmental protection, etc. These are values. These are very clear values, and these values are in the European treaties, and the European treaties were written mostly by the governments, and mostly by governments such as even Mr. Orban's. So what he was doing was that he was lying to his citizens in the guise of telling them the truth. he was withholding from them the kind of promise that he himself had signed up to when Hungary transitioned from an authoritarian regime to the European project. And then, if Europe reacts, he will complain about loss of sovereignty. Whereas in fact, he, as authoritarians tend to do, is talking about sovereignty of the Hungarian people in order to hijack this sovereignty to himself and his party. And you can see this in other countries. So what should Europeans do, and what should the European Union do when faced with such a threat? One needs to
but also what it has to do with itself.
And partly it's also what it has to do with itself. I'll get there. So first, the European Union must be very clear, and European citizens must be very sincere that this is a threat. If a member state turns authoritarian, then the other member state learns how to do the same, and will do it because the boundaries will have been pushed a little bit further of what you can do. You can hijack the judicial system, then you can go for the media, then you can go for schools, etc., etc. We know from the past that it takes only 10 years for this continent to be engulfed in a fascist wave. From fascism in Italy to fascism everywhere, it took 10 years from the 20s to the 30s. And this is, in my view, it is not historical fascism, but it is the same kind of threat that we are facing. And to take back a little of the question that you've put to Sergey, one thing that we can learn from the populists is to be very frank, very, very direct in the expression of our values. So, first one, Europe is an anti-fascist project, and we have to defend the values of that project when they are under threat. And that is, in my view, non-negotiable. Because it is also non-negotiable for the other side. So it has to be very clear, because otherwise it is a threat also for me in Portugal, or for you in Poland, or you in France, because it will get to my country as well. And also because I don't want to be abandoned if it happens in my country. I must act if it happens in Hungary or any other country. But then Europe must also transform itself in order to not be subject to charges of hypocrisy or double standards. Europe can, Europe cannot be a defender of rule of law or democracy if Europe is not democratic or rule of law abiding itself. And Europe cannot...
And is it not?
Huh?
And is it not?
It is partially a democracy. It's not a full democracy. And that's one of the problems. That's one of the things where I believe DiEM25 is completely right. I don't know if DiEM25 completely knows how to go about the project of democratizing the European Union, but the main insight that either you democratize the European Union or the European Union is in deep trouble, I think it's spot on. But then, then the proposals of the DiEM25 end up being mostly on the economic side, and on that side they reveal the same kind of, or almost the same kind of the economists. The economists, how shall I say this?
Prejudice.
Prejudice. Prejudice and even a kind of economist arrogance that you find, in any kind of economist. Neoliberal economists, Keynesian economists, Marxist economists, social democratic economists. They will all think that you change the economy and then politics will go, will go behind. And that's not what happens. Another thing that I think we can learn from populists is that, and here I will disagree from Sergey, they do not listen to the people. That is a common mistake. When Farage was elected to the European Parliament and was there for 20 years, and even up to the last year before the British referendum, membership of the European Union was on the lower 10 priorities of British citizens. Healthcare was, top one. Jobs was, you know, number two. Maybe immigration, yes, he kind of jumped in immigration because that was the only way that he could take his anti-European agenda forward. But being a member or not being a member of the European Union was not a high priority of the British people. It was a high priority of Nigel Farage. He banged on about it for 20 years, and he was never either afraid or ashamed to say what, and he was in a very difficult atmosphere for him because he had, you know, at the point 600 members of the European Parliament who were on the other side. And he was there saying that it was a failed project, it would collapse, etc. So in that sense, I think that he, with Danny Cohn-Bendit and Guy Verhofstadt, were maybe the only three MEPs that were turning the European Parliament into a true parliament because they wanted to have the European Parliament as an arena for a battle of ideas.
That's a great story about the power of courage and human agency in politics, isn't it?
I think so. I think it's one of the lessons. Then you have to distinguish sincerity from authenticity. People are tired of politicians that seem insincere. Sometimes these politicians seem insincere, but what they are really doing is that they know the complexities of the issues. They will take a long time to explain their ideas. They will appear a little bit technocratic. You know, they will be a little bit like Hillary Clinton. Maybe she was sincere, but everybody thought that she was a hypocrite in some way. And when faced with the opportunity of, you know, having a sincere and a complete liar, who was Donald Trump, that everybody knew was a liar, it's interesting to think that people were still relating to Donald Trump as if he was sincere. You know, people knew that he was lying, but they would go about like, you know, like when you have a cousin that is a liar but is an authentic liar, like, you know, is honest about his lying, is honest about his cheating, and Donald Trump was a little bit like that. So, you know, Aristotle, back in the, you know, 2,500 years ago, he said that this is a very important distinction, that sometimes people will go for authenticity when what they're looking for is sincerity. So, to sum up, people will respect you, you know, will respect us, the Greens or the Progressives, when we tell them the truth about what we think. So in that sense, of course, we have to listen to people, and it's important to listen to people, but it's not as important then to repeat to people what we have just listened, because people will not respect you for that. People will think that you were just, you know, making a kind of a focus group in order to change your minds. So, for instance, Macron was quite smart in the fact that he imitated populists in one sense. In the beginning of his rallies, he said, bring the European flag. You will be, people will, you know, will satirize you because of that. They will joke about you. They will say that it's stupid, that the European Union is not in fashion, but bring the flag, you know. Have the courage of showing that you love this flag, although it seems corny, it seems kitsch, and that has worked. So it's an important thing that I think.
Thank you. To sum up this part of our conversation, I want to point our attention to one aspect of Kannitha. When Kannitha said that Macron spoke about Europe able to protect her citizens, it is a very distinctly different narrative from the usual narrative of both populists and anti-populists. Because I am in favor of learning from populists, but I am also in favor of unlearning from them. And one thing I believe it's good to unlearn from populists is the narrative of the strict father. That's what George Lakoff says about narrative of strict father who commands you to do things, who punishes you if you don't follow, who is very strict with the rules and is like powerful center of authority. And that's one shared assumption of both populists like Orban and Kaczynski and pro-European politicians who want Europe to punish countries for their mistakes, which actually doesn't go very well with voters, even pro-European voters, that we have the alternative, which is the narrative of a caring parent, a parent who, whatever the gender, is focused on protecting, caring, listening to, which builds a quite different sort of relationship. Now I would, before I give opportunity to ask questions and comment to all the participants of our widely understood participants of our discussion, I would like to follow with one question, the same question to all of you three, and I ask you for very concise answers, no longer than 2 minutes. There is now a widespread new definition of situation that the old distinction between left and right is not as valid as it used to be, and it's not even the distinction about populism and anti-populism, it's rather the division between cosmopolitans and nationalists, or globalists and localists. Many electoral campaigns in recent times and also the Brexit campaign are mentioned in this respect to prove this point. And some people, actually, if we speak about green politics, it is also a hotly contested topic because many Greens believe we should be very strongly on the cosmopolitan side of this divide. Some Greens, important figures like Caroline Lucas, believe that we should be more localist side of this divide. And also there are many Greens who believe that this division is not as fruitful as it seems, and we should undermine it or try to be on both sides of the division to a certain point. So I would like to ask you about your own understanding of the divide between localists and globalists, or cosmopolitan and nationalist, and where do you personally stand on this division? I would reverse the order, so start with Rui this time.
Okay, so I both think
2 minutes.
I both think that left versus right still stands. I'm deeply attached to that dichotomy, and I also think that left and right translate into different things in the cosmopolitan versus nationalist debate, which in my view it is the classical debate. It has been since the 19th century, even before, and cosmopolitanism being a current of thought or philosophy that is one of the oldest that we have in this continent. So it's kind of funny when people talk about cosmopolitans as being something very recent. It's been around since, ancient Greece. And it's different from localism versus globalism, because in that view, I think that the Greens are right. The Greens have always been about, think global, act local, but that's a way of being a cosmopolitan. It's a way of, doing your best as a citizen of the world wherever you are. And that can mean that you don't leave your village. The biggest cosmopolitans never left where they were. Kant was in Königsberg, now Kaliningrad. I know that we have people from Kaliningrad all his life. So he was not cosmopolitan in the sense that he was well-traveled or, or kind of a neoliberal globalist.
Where do you stand?
I completely stand with cosmopolitanism, because I think that's the root of left-wing thought. What is the left about? The left is about you gaining citizenship, you gaining agency to define your future, irregardless of whether you have a king or a pope or whatever. This is the beginning. Then you have, after the French Revolution, you have a strong push for social rights, which means that irregardless of you having been born a noble or a bourgeois or a worker, you should have access to self-realization. Cosmopolitanism is the same thing adapted to the reality of global imbalances and global differences. So it's about saying that whether you were born in Angola or in Canada, you should have the same right to self-realization. And that also translates into diversity in our own towns and in countries. And in that sense, I think that you know, you should fight your corner.
Okay.
So I don't think that cosmopolitanism and pro-diversity, pro-immigration, pro-refugees is in the majority now. But if I don't defend it, who will?
Okay, good question. Kannitha, over to you.
I don't know what I can add to that because I totally agree about what you say. But I would just say that sometimes nationalism is just helping people, like when they have, well, sometimes people have fears towards things that they don't know about, towards like, how do you say that? No, yeah, I can.
Okay, so Sergey, you waited long for your mic.
Yeah, I think this is a valid question that you were asking, but sometimes I think that maybe the difficulty why this debate is now so open is probably not so much about right and left. I would define it as uncertainty about what is conservatism and what is progressiveness today, especially regarding democratic model of society. Because we have to probably tell ourselves that even though we pride ourselves of being progressive, was your starting point, everyone's progressive here, yeah? Being progressive today means also preserving and conserving the status quo in certain areas, in certain countries. This is precisely the challenge of populists. Many populists, especially in Western societies, in European Western societies, are, you know, in a sense, new progressives because they are trying to change the status quo. They are challenging the status quo. They say that the status quo is not okay, it does not benefit the people, these are liars, these are elites who are ruling the society. So the thing is that maybe we should start being honest to ourselves and understand that our agenda is not just progressive, it's composed of, I would say, 3 different components. The one component is a kind of a conservationist, preservationist component. And it is, especially in Western Europe, it is about kind of constitutional foundations because we have achieved, and you know, we can talk about transparency, we can talk about corruption, certain areas, we can talk about detached politicians, but if we talk about Germany, if we talk about Sweden, if we talk about Netherlands, the system as we have, the democratic liberal system as we have, is the system that the best we can get for now. And then the challenge, because it protects minorities, because it has constitutional safeguards, and because the politicians that we have are, I'm talking about Germany now, I know many politicians, they are not corrupt politicians that we see in House of Cards, right? And because we have a social market economy that does have a certain minimum standards, not for everyone, we have to improve it. But from that, coming from that perspective, we're trying to defend the status quo against those, in this case, populists from right and left, who want to kind of revolutionize it and change it and break it. So in Western Europe, if we're talking about Western Europe, if we're talking about the EU as an institution, preserving the EU as our common platform, regardless of institutional changes that we have. This is also a conservative agenda. We want to conserve and preserve what we have. And also regarding the status and the principles of the current diversity, of respect and tolerance in our societies that we have achieved in the past decades in, say, Western Europe, but also in Eastern Europe as well, in Middle and Eastern Europe, where we have a lot of progress on this. We want to have it, we want to preserve it. So this is number one. Number two, this has to be complemented with a transformational agenda. And this transformational agenda is also cluster either Eastern Europe, we still have to make transformation in many of those countries. It's about EU reforms, it's about labor market and societal reforms, but it's also about visions We have to provide, we can talk about that, what is our vision for our societies? This is what people want. And then the number 3, which I already mentioned before, is, I think, the third component is a negotiationist agenda. We have to start talking to people. Maybe it's not, it's not just listening, but it's also communicating, going back to people so that people understand what you're saying. Some people don't even understand what politicians are saying. Do people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about EU and everything that you've been doing for 5 years? You are able to explain it, but many people cannot. And if you cannot talk to each other, you cannot negotiate about the future. You cannot arrive to common answers regarding the future. So this, then an educational part of this negotiationist agenda, that we do have to explain to people what we mean with our progressive agenda. We do have to explain to people also that many of their preconceptions of how politics is done in Brussels or in Berlin or in Paris is just wrong because they watch too many TV shows from the United States. Yeah, we are not surrounded by corrupt politicians, and it's not the case in the United States either, by the way. It's a communication media society that surrounds us where we are not able to tell the truth from fake anymore. And the third part, and this comes to you as part of this negotiationist agenda, is we will have to start redefining what we think about and how what we think about when we say nation, when we say motherland, when we say patriotism, when we say Europe. And this is something that's been done in Austria by the Greens, and I think, and certain other concepts. Because if we don't start talking to people in a way that strengthens their belonging to something, we're going to lose these people. They're not going to listen to us. There is a sense that people want to belong to something. So let's provide them with something that they are proud to belong to, but which is open, progressive concept of, for example, a nation as part of a European family and also as part of something you can be proud of. Let's redefine patriotism, for example.
Okay. Kannitha, your last chance to speak in this row.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add something on what you say about education, about engagement, and just that the young people really want to play a role in the political field and to be able to communicate with the politicians. Not only, like you said, to be heard about what their fears are, what they want to do in the future, but just to be able to act. And like currently we have in France an emergence of what we call the Civic Tech, which is composed of different associations and actors which really want to play a role in the civic education. Which means actually to be able to spread information about what currently happened in the political field, what is discussed, and you have some associations which enable people to take part to the discussions, different law discussion, and other one to just have dialogue with the politicians. And yeah.
You will have an occasion also to answer at the end, but let's stop at this point. We have not much time left for questions, but still we can collect a couple of questions. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people raising their hands. So let's start with this part, because most people are here. So who will give the mic? Okay, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for your answers and lectures. My question is actually to Rui Tavares. It concerns Hungary. When you described like urban policies and the situation in Hungary, you took it as a pre-assumption, kinda, that what the Orban's government's doing is actually against the will of Hungarian people. Like this was your assumption, and then based on it, you described your view of what should the EU do, like to tackle this situation. Well, I think that we might also look at this situation from a different perspective, because as we said, well, there exists this kind of concept of illiberal democracy by Fareed Zakaria, which basically says that, I mean, people can democratically elect non-liberal leaders. So, well, my assumption would be that actually what Orban government's doing is actually not against the will of Hungarian people, and Hungarian people do want to see these policies sometimes like against the EU and so on. So, well, I will ask you to take this assumption and answer the question: what should the EU do in relation to Hungary, if actually this is the will of Hungarian people, what's happening now in Hungary? Yeah, thank you.
The mic is wandering. Please present yourself and be concise.
Hello to everyone and guten Tag to Herr Lagodinsky. Yeah, I have a question about populists. Like, not even Germany looks like such a stable pillar of the Western world these days. Angela Merkel, who has served as Chancellor since 2005 and plans to run for a fourth term next fall. But her party, like her country, has felt the black cash against slow economic growth and mass migration across Europe. So a November 2016 poll found that 42% of Germans want a referendum on EU membership after Brexit. So my question is, will the populist wave wash away NATO and the European Union? And why populism is a threat to electoral integrity? And to question to a former member of European Parliament, what is a true parliament? And how to mitigate a populist? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your very insightful remarks. So I actually want to ask you two questions, because Mr. Lagodinsky said that we could learn one thing from the populists, which is taking voters seriously. And maybe I do not understand quite clearly what you mean by that, but I strongly disagree that populists actually take voters seriously as such. They may appeal to certain fears that voters express and then use this platform to achieve their own goals, but when they actually come to power, they do not treat voters seriously at all. So I would really like you to elaborate on that, particularly because if what you really mean by taking voters seriously is to being responsive to people's needs, then I'm quite concerned what we have been doing in politics for the last 20 years as a green movement, because if we have not been responsive, it's quite concerning. But the other thing I wanted to mention, because I think it was the moderator, Mr. Ostolski, who said that the current division line is more between cosmopolitanism and nationalism, sort of, as opposed to left-right, and used Brexit as an example. But actually, well, my personal experience from the UK is that since the Brexit actually acted as a catalyst in refining what is, in my opinion, the most, well, the strongest right and left division that I've ever seen in Europe. And, you know, I've only lived for 25 years, 26 years in this world, so I haven't seen much. But you could see that in the electoral campaign now during before the snap election called by Theresa May, that Brexit, even though Brexit was supposedly the reason for calling the election, it was completely absent from the campaign, and the campaign was completely focused on social issues, and you could see that. And this is also why people believe that Jeremy Corbyn could have been so successful, because they don't discuss European Union at all at the moment. So I would like you to maybe, well, to know your opinion on that, maybe. Thank you.
Is there a woman asking question? Okay, I can see some hands here.
I would like to ask from Rui
Please
Tavares. I'm from Hungary, from the Hungarian Green Party. And my question is, what do you think about triggering Article 7, and if sanctions against the country could have the opposite effect they're meant to be?
Okay, if there is a short question, we can fit one more.
Yeah, very short question. As we are talking about populism, I wonder whether populists really challenge status quo, or they just promise or threaten us to challenge it. Because if I look at the examples, either Poland or the States, it seems like the populists threaten or promise us to challenge it, but in the reality, the people oppose it and come back to the status quo. So we can't do any step forward. With populists, in my opinion, we just came back to, we asked them not to interfere, not to change what we already have as the status quo. So like the question is whether they really want to challenge the status quo.
Thank you. Now we are going to our conclusion part. You have 2 minutes to sum it all up. Who starts? Who wants to start?
I can start. It's going to be hard in 2 minutes, because I had questions about Hungary, and some of them are about Article 7, and not everybody knows what Article 7 is about. So Article 7 is about withdrawing the voting rights of a member state of the European Union that violates rule of law or fundamental rights. And by the way, for now, it's the only tool that we have in the treaties to use in these cases, and I think it's quite probably the wrong tool, because it will aggravate even more the citizens of these countries that will feel.
You also had a question on illiberal democracy.
And it's the two link, because if you do that, if in order to preserve democracy and fundamental rights and rule of law in Hungary, you end up telling Hungary that Hungary does not have voting rights in the Council, then Mr. Orban will be justified in saying that he is the one representing the real Hungarian people. Whereas the idea of a constitutional democracy, or a liberal democracy, as you want to call it, is not only that we are a democracy now, but also that we will be a democracy 4 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. In that sense, of course, the majority rules, but the majority is also allowed to change. It is also allowed to evolve. What people like Mr. Kaczynski and Mr. Orban are trying to do, and also Brexiteers, in a sense, is to say, you've had your opportunity to decide what is the will of the British people or the will of the Hungarian people. The will of the Hungarian people or the British people is Brexit or Orban. And now you've made your decision, and we are implementing whatever we think it's the right interpretation of your decision, and we will not move from here.
Your last word?
Okay, my last point regards this idea of, you going back to redefining patriotism or nationalism in a positive way. It's in some questions, or patriotism. Nation. No, or nation. I think it goes without saying that, I even feel a little bit strange saying this. I'm a patriot. I love my country. I really love it. Not only on football, on many other things. And citizens love their countries. Cosmopolitans, which are citizens of the world, also love the world as a polity. Maybe not a complete polity today, maybe a polity in the future, but what they think is that they can love both, and they can also love Europe in between. And to use your strict father nurturing parent comparison, what current nationalists are doing to us. They're telling us Europe and cosmopolitanism are a bad idea because you will stop loving your nation. That's what they're telling. It's like telling you if you are going to have a baby, you will stop loving your mother. Okay? Whereas everybody that has a baby, they still go on loving their lover, loving their mother and father, etc. It's just silly for, you know, a big majority of us to think that if you love Europe, you will stop loving Portugal. If you feel that you're a citizen of the world, you will stop loving Europe or Portugal. But if you go back to the drawing board and, you know, engage in that speech where motherland, 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 the nation will be the thing that you will be discussing about in the next 10 years because, you know, some people have gotten some electoral successes out of that discourse. There's two things that you will do. You will have the conversation that they want to have, okay? Three things, actually. Second thing, okay. You will not, I will end up with this, you will not correct the wrongs of globalization because there is no way to correct the wrongs of globalization without you having international cooperation and having a cosmopolitan sphere that also encompasses human rights. Third thing, you will leave everybody that already feels a citizen of the world without a voice. And if you look at polls, international polls, more than half of the people already say that they are citizens of the world. And all these people are not being represented because nationalists want to speak about the nation, and now progressives also want to speak about the nation because that's what progressives do. We run behind the agenda, whereas we should be at least partially dictating the agenda. So when Barbara Nowacka here yesterday was saying, let's go for contraception for everybody in Europe and let's try to do a citizens' initiative in that, I think it's a good idea because it changes the topic. You know, rather than the things that populists want to talk about, let's talk about the things that we want to talk about, and let's talk about them in a European scale, and then let's force them to have our conversation. Okay?
Kannitha, what do you want to talk about?
Maybe just to conclude in one sentence, I would say that populism is now everywhere in Europe, and the different governments have just to be aware that telling the citizen that populism is wrong is not enough anymore. They have to bring real solutions to the real dangers that are facing any society now, like, for instance, terrorist attack. It's a real danger. And the government have to bring real solutions to that, because if they fail, then the populists will have a free ride on it. So, yeah, real solutions.
Sergey?
First of all, I agree absolutely with what you were saying. The two questions basically that were addressed to me, I think they dealt with a similar thing. The first question was about, but the populists challenge status quo, or just when they come to power, they don't change it. I think we have to understand, most of us understand it, but we have to repeat this to ourselves. Politics here takes place on two levels. One level is communication level, and the other level is the substantial policy level. And what we are talking about is a communication level, because communication level, especially during times of elections, is our reality. And if populist party, which is in opposition, says certain things and people believe it, then this is, first of all, the reality we have to deal with. And this is what I mean. If they campaign with slogans that want to abolish our system, that say, the system, the liberal democratic system is wrong, then they are the ones who are challenging the status quo. I'm not talking about what happens with them when they come to power. We all know what happens when they come to power, and this is why we have to prevent them from coming to power. But what I was saying is that in this game, communication game pre-elections, we kind of change roles, we switch roles. We certainly have to defend status quo in certain countries. I'm not talking about Poland. The other thing that I think you mentioned, Rui, is is this nationalism? I did not say we have to redefine nationalism. What I was saying is, and maybe this is a discourse which is especially sensitive in Germany or in Austria with our history, and this is a very heavily historically charged discourse, is that we have to start thinking about the future. We are not able to stay in opposition to this longing for belonging. Yeah, which people look for. And we've been having, for example, in Germany, a debate about the term Leitkultur, leading culture, where this was an empty debate. It was the conservatives saying we need a Leitkultur, and the others say we don't need the Leitkultur, instead of us, progressives, saying, okay, you want a leading culture, we will define leading culture for you. And this leading culture in our society will be diversity, minorities protection, liberal democracy, environmental issues, etc., etc. This is the proactive progressive policies that we need to do. And not that what someone asked and said, you know, so what have we been doing as Greens so far? Not listening to people, not reacting to their needs. I think we wasted a lot of time by not listening to people and not reacting to their needs, because for many people, the issues that we've been talking are not the issues in the epicenter of their everyday lives. So let's reframe the issues, let's start talking and listening to their needs and inject our values, reacting to them so that they listen and that they become open to us. So green, you want, you know, green transformation? Let's talk about Green New Deal, creating green jobs. Let's talk about the transformation. We're talking about the loss of employment. Okay, let's talk about the basic income, you know, the Grundeinkommen.
I believe the argument is clear.
Sorry, what did you say?
I believe the argument is clear.
I think the argument is clear, and it is even more clear when I repeat it even more. But I'm conscious of our time issues.
Okay, one was last word from myself. One comment was addressed to myself, and curiously enough, it's also a good starting point to sum up our discussion about learning from populists and also the divisions, new divisions between nationalist and cosmopolitan politics. I would contradict Brexit with Austrian electoral campaign. When you look at the presidential campaign in Austria, you can see that Alexander Van der Bellen, what he did achieve was a successful blurring of the lines between cosmopolitan and nationalist narratives. He was very much pro-refugee, very pro-European, but at the same time he was the first Green candidate in Austrian history who used the national flag as a background on his electoral leaflets. And also he was the first non-far-right politician in Austria who used the word Heimat in a positive context, which made the far-right politicians furious. So that was an example of combining what Sergey proposes and what Rui proposes, like standing very strongly for your values, but also framing them in a way which is understandable for the supporters of your opponent. Brexit was a different strategy, or the election, snap election in the United Kingdom, because why Brexit was not the topic. It was effectively taken off the table by Jeremy Corbyn, who simply accepted it. He waved the white flag. Hello, Brexit. And this was a very cunning and very Machiavellian way to bring the left-right division back, but at a certain cost. Basically, what Corbyn achieved was very similar to what Tony Blair achieved 25 years ago when he took privatization of the table, marketization of the table, saying, hello, markets. So that was a very Machiavellian and successful, to a certain extent, strategy, but at a very high cost, which is, I believe, very different from the Green approach when we try to assimilate some of the language of our opponents, but without losing what's at the heart of our politics. Thank you for the debate. Thank you for the questions. I am sorry not everyone was able to ask your questions, but I believe you still will have opportunity to talk to our panelists after we come out of this hall. And now I give the mic to Alexandra Hirschfeld, who will tell you what we shall do next.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are running totally out of time. I know that you should have like 15 minutes break, but I have the honor to moderate the next panel, which is called Welcome the Other, Refugees and Immigrants. And before we start the panel, I would love to invite you to watch one short film. So this is the question, because you should have like 15 minutes break, but we should start in 5 minutes. So maybe can we do it like 35, that you will be here, because it will be good if you can watch the whole movie. The movie is like 12 minutes. So can we do it like this, like 10:35 we are here again? Thanks a lot.
Thank you.